Hi, everybody. Welcome to Metaphysical Egypt. Our website is horusrising.com. I'm Allan Peoples, again joined by Patricia Awyan Lehman. Hi, Patricia.
Hey, Alan.
I just want to say thank you to everybody who subscribed and who liked our first couple of podcasts. We had a great response, and we've got more information coming. So please share, like, and subscribe, and stay tuned. Today, we're getting into some more in-depth information. As you can see, we're talking about the breath of life and looking at the symbolism related to that. Patricia, do you want to tell people what we're looking at here?
Oh, all the things we're going to be talking about. Let's just go ahead and get started. So this is a quote from Manly P. Hall, and he says, when the human race learns to read the language of symbolism, a great veil will fall from the eyes of men. Wow, I'm ready.
Yeah.
You know, it's so true. The symbols, you know, the symbols are incredible. They contain such an incredible wealth of information. But one of the things I learned when I started doing this, and this is my passion. It's always been my passion, but I've been doing it basically, in depth and focused for the last 14 years. And the one thing I learned is we can't just look at a symbol and look it up on Google or Wikipedia and think we've got the answer in a nice little contained paragraph. These symbols are basically multidimensional themselves. And we talked about consciousness in, the last two episodes, and how we look at things in one dimension, two dimensions, three dimensions, and that they can have meaning in even more dimensions. And the same thing goes for the cycles of life, and the cycles of consciousness that we experience. We've talked about evolving and devolving consciousness. And the one thing I've realized is that we go way back to a time when consciousness was at its height. These symbols, they were given to us, I think, for this moment in time when we are awakening again and beginning to see that we've actually been living in a dream, and have been basically asleep and not realizing what's right in front of our eyes. So I bring up all these symbols just to give you an idea of how the symbols themselves can change, morph, have multiple meanings. Hakim would have said, and what I've come to understand is that every symbol, every hieroglyph, every phrase, every icon, every myth, in all the mythologies in the world, can have at least 7 levels of interpretation, and that's based on our chakras, if you will. We talk about the root chakra. You have that, that physical, that totally deep-rooted, earthy understanding of, everything at face value, basically. But as you move up and you awaken and you're able to transmute your polarity, everything starts to come more things. You start to see more and more things. And as Manly P. Hall said, the veil is lifted. So we can look at, we can look at the ankh. The ankh has so many levels of meaning. We're going to talk about that in a moment. We look at the caduceus here. The caduceus stems from a very ancient symbol. That what I have next to it here is the hieroglyph for H. Well, you turn that hieroglyph upside down, and this has to do with time, by the way. The H is the two squares that separate heaven and earth. So it has to do with life force and energy. And you turn that glyph upside down, and you're looking basically at the caduceus, the kundalini energy, right? Which is what the caduceus means in modern times, more modern times. But it's talking about, an ancient concept of kundalini and kundalini rising through the chakra system, right? Through these levels of
And we see this also in the
awareness.
double helix of the DNA.
Exactly. So again, thank you. So many different ways to look at just one symbol, but also how it morphs and changes through time. But often, there are elements of truth in every way of looking at it. And this is what's so fascinating, but also it's a reminder that when we're looking at symbols, that we can't just look at even one moment in time's understanding. What something meant in, 2,000 years ago meant something different maybe 4,000 years ago, and totally means something different today, each holding an element of truth. So as we go up through the series, we're going to look at this migration, how things change more, and the only constant is change. So on
I
that
think one
note,
thing also to keep in mind is that symbols speak to the subconscious.
yes, hopefully.
We, I believe we intuitively know the meaning of these symbols.
I think you're absolutely right. And I also, so many people have come to Egypt, and I've heard so many stories about what they see in the temples when they, look at the symbolism on the walls. And I've also talked to people who just sit there and take it in. They don't have to know the meaning. They don't look everything up in a book. And yet they begin to have visions that sometimes the symbols or the hieroglyphs start to dance in front of them and tell a story. So you're absolutely right. If we, can let go of our analytical side of our brain and begin to allow the intuitive side to, open that up to look at everything in a more open-minded way, it's amazing what can come to us. But as a researcher, I tend to want to look everything up and see what everybody has to say, and then try and take it, to another even level by walking around it and giving it dimensionality. There's another symbol right in front of us. It's the Omega symbol, and it's a letter of the Greek alphabet. But if you look at the image underneath, this is Hathor, and it's the shape of Hathor's hair. This is the netter, who they say is the symbol of love and dance and joy. Oh yeah, she's all those things, but again, she's even so much more. She is the womb that gives birth to form. And that is what the Omega symbol actually stands for. It is a womb. And you often see the Alpha and Omega. The Alpha is the seed. So, it's the seed within the womb. And then the symbol of the mare at the top, you see the hieroglyph for the mare is, it's a plow, right? It's something that seeds the earth, but it's also something that opens a path for water to flow, right? To nurture the seeds. And it's called the mare, and it's where we get the word Mary, right? It means beloved. Mare means love. Mary means beloved.
It
Wow. And
also means sea and water and current.
exactly. So many different things, and it's the feminine, it's the currency, and it's the A, the alpha, the first letter in our alphabet. Wow. So yeah. And Manly P. Hall here says a great symbol is not immediately exhaustible. In fact, it might not even be remotely exhaustible. It is something that continues to mean more as we become capable of understanding more. So this is exactly what I was talking about. The more we open our levels of awareness, the more the symbols will dance and sing and tell us their story. So wow. So let's look at the symbol of the ankh, right? We said we were going to talk about the breath of life. Here we look at the ankh as literally the sun walking on water. And you might say, how can I say that? Well, if you look at the image of the sunrise here, the sun itself is what I would call the womb of the ankh, or the top of the ankh, right? The circle. And the horizon is the top, the tau, the T of the ankh. And then you have the breath of life coming out of the sun across the water. The sun is walking across the water. Light represented life, and darkness, death. Strong sunlight reflected the power of Ra, whose rays descend from the sky to the earth to give it life. Sunlight is the creative power that erases darkness and renews creation. And this is huge because they had so many rituals that spoke to this event, this solar alignment, the sun rising to give or activate the inert, or oftentimes they would take statues to the top of the roof of the temples and put them out on the new year, on the solstice. When the sun rose, it meant it was the spark of life to animate the netter, to give it life. And here I have images. Allan and I, remember, we're fortunate to go to Abu Simbel on October 22nd, 2020. And we chose that time because we knew during the pandemic that there were so few people here in Egypt that we might have an opportunity to actually really experience the sun rising on the horizon, to enter this temple of Ramses II at Abu Simbel. And we've been told there were thousands of people there on this happens twice a year. It happens on February 22nd and October 22nd. But normally thousands of people come, and it's a rare chance to get inside the temple. But we were able to be inside the temple to have this incredible experience. And the pictures I have here show you, what it was like to see the sunrise, but also that sunrise from in the temple. I was all excited. We're in the temple. We actually, there were only a couple hundred people there, I think. And we got to be able to be inside the temple, lined up to actually, you see, I have this wonderful picture of the Holy of Holies here, where the images of Ramses II, Amun-Ra, and Ra-Harakti are all being shown by the sun, are activated by the sun, all except for Ptah, who is totally in the darkness. And this is because, of course, I've mentioned this before, that he is the process of becoming form. Whereas they are heavenly, he's more earthbound. He's wrapped in his own wings. But what was really exciting is I remembered to myself, well, wait a minute, I want to be activated. And I turned around and looked toward, that's exactly what went through my mind. And
Wait a
I
minute,
looked
what about
toward,
me?
exactly. This is this great moment in time, right? And I turned around and I was just so blown away by the feeling of that sun coming across the water and hitting me on the face. Truly a breath of life. It was probably the most precious moment of that whole morning.
And you know what?
Um,
Everybody who goes there misses it because they all filed in as quickly as possible, took a picture of the statues in the back, and then got on their buses and left. But the event is going on for uh, minutes and minutes and minutes, and the temple is totally cleared out after about a minute or two, and you can stand there and have this experience all to yourself. So if anybody's
and
lucky enough to
Allan,
be there, just remember that.
what
Be
I was
patient.
just going to say, you actually got an incredible video of what it felt like to walk across the temple into that area. Alan's going to post this on the channel soon,
Hmm.
so you can see it. Was you did a fantastic job. Really, one beautiful video, an incredible experience. So here's the ankh in its many different expressions. And I have the ankh here in the center. You can see two different stylistic versions. But you're looking at, everybody says this is the staff of life, that the ankh means life. The ankh also means water. Interesting, right? Because it's a breath of life. It's a breath of energy, and energy of movement, and water is movement. So the ankh is often used as a symbol of water itself, purification. It's the breath of life. It's the womb and the phallus. It's the womb. It's the omega basically, and the tau, right? The tau is the physicality. It's going from the formless into the form, or the physical expression. On the far left, you see the Tet symbol, which it's the knot of Isis. It's known to be the knot of Isis. But what you're looking at is that the tau, the polarity is fallen. The two sides, the two arms of the ankh have fallen to the side. And you're looking at a moment of silence, if you will, which we're going to talk a lot in future series.
The
Well,
moment that the
actually,
magnetic field goes down.
Yes, exactly. So we are going to discuss that today or the next time. And the ankh next to this pyramidal shape that has the little seed at the bottom.
Yeah, this is
Hakim
representative
told
of
me
a
this.
seed.
Exactly. This actually, it's not what the book tells you the hieroglyph means, but Hakim told me that this meant the seed of life, right? Which makes perfect sense to me, the seed within the pyramid as this expression of, this the seeding of life. And then Alan and I were also in October of 2020. I went to New York to spend some time with Alan, going to some of the museums, and we went to the Met and saw this image of the ankh as a device, if you will. So if you look at that closer, it's wrapped in the arms. The top of the ankh is wrapped in the arms of the Ka, right? The symbol for the Ka. Those are hands on either side of the arms of the ankh. And you can see this almost as you can see the two waters, right? Being used in some way. And the mind can go crazy coming up with different ideas on how this might have been used. But the ankh as a device, truly interesting. And Crichton Miller, fascinating man, great book. I have this book, The Golden Thread of Time. And this isn't a true ankh, but it gives you an idea of an ancient symbol. This is the Celtic cross, but he also relates it to the ankh, and he says this can be used as an instrument to build, navigate, and keep time. So sort of like a compass utilizing the stars, and also to create angles and alignments, and again navigate. And of course, they did use tools like this. So again, incredible when you see these symbols that they're not just symbolism of symbolizing concepts, but they can also have possibly been used as tools themselves for measuring. And I'm going to talk about that more when we discuss biogeometry. I had mentioned I took this biogeometry course with Dr. Ibrahim Karim and his daughter Dureya, both daughters actually, and Layla, and incredible the knowledge they have on how some of the staffs and different symbols, amulets, might have been used for measuring for angles, shapes, colors, and energy.
Right. And all of
So
these instruments to extend the senses of the central nervous system.
exactly. And developing these instruments at a time when we lose our ability to feel what it is they're measuring. So, this is how I actually see it. There was a time we could, like so many of our animals today, the birds, and the bats that can navigate through, they have that radar and all these different senses, that I believe we all once had. I believe we once navigated the earth because we felt, the currents, we knew. And then suddenly we begin to devolve and we lose that ability. So we develop tools, which, just makes perfect sense. But I
Right.
also think today that, the time for needing tools is over. And if we can let the tools go, we can begin to awaken those latent senses within ourselves, as Hakim used to say as well. So here we're looking at a papyrus. This is Nut. And what I'm trying to express here is how much they understood the cycles, and again, use symbolism to project this knowledge to us, and again, on many different levels. But here we're looking at an image that talks about the reflection of the ages and stages of conscious awareness that are mirrored by the 5 sacred stages of the daily journey of the sun across the sky. They liken the stages of consciousness and ages to the path of the sun across the heavens. So this image of Nut, she represents basically the heavens or the Milky Way. And you can see that she gives birth to the sun as the winged Kheper beetle in the morning, and then she swallows the sun again at night. So as she swallows the sun at sunset, the sun goes through her body as these stages, and then she gives birth again the next morning, or the next year, or the next great year. Cycles within cycles within cycles. And I also like to point out, and this is something Hakim was one of the first things he talked to us about when I first came to Egypt, and that is the fact that the ancients never believed in death. They always believed in eternal life, that the cycles just continue over and over and over again. You know, there is no time, there is no space, there's only now, but we're experiencing this as consciousness experiencing itself. So he was adamant we are eternal, and he said that the ancients talked about the physical death as going to the west, or westing. They called it westing and likened it to the cycles of the sun again. The sun sets in the west only to rise again each morning. So this is where we get the concept, have faith, you know, that the sun will rise again. And it becomes the concept that, you know, that the Christ energy will return, the sun will rise again. These concepts are eternal as well.
So really,
so I love this.
when we die, as we call it, that's really just the beginning of a night cycle, as it were, just like the sun passing through the underworld to be reborn again in the morning.
Only we're actually in the night cycle now. We're in the dream time. And when we wake up, we will wake up or be reborn as the Kheper, the winged Kheper.
Well, that's something yes, we need to get into a little more.
And we will. It's all in here. So, heaven and earth. Creation is separation, right? So when heaven and earth separate, this is the beginning of creation. And so what we're looking at here is
just like the letter H, the capital H, as you were saying before.
Yeah. Exactly.
The separation of heaven and earth.
That's it. And the H also represents hydrogen, the hydrogen atom, the atom, yeah, right? But again, we're going to get into this later. It's incredible.
Atomic number one, like atom. Forget it.
That's in here too. We have so many things to present.
Okay.
But yeah, separation following the union that gives birth to the sun. So we're, you know, this is the womb. This is the great womb that gives birth to life. And, you know, I'm going to show you some of the ancient Egyptian images of this same concept here. This is a cartoon image. But you can see that Geb is always presented as almost a sine wave form, because
Geb is the earth.
He is the earth, and you can see little trees growing out of him. So you know that image, even the image, the hieroglyph for earth is like a horizontal with, you know, little trees coming out of it. And above this, you see Nut with the stars. So this is heaven and earth separating to create life force, the breath of Ra, right? The Ka of Ra. That's life force. And that's gives birth to the breath. So here we have the Khemitian cycles as taught to us by Hakim. So he said there were 5 stages of consciousness, as I pointed out, and that the sunrise was the Kheper. So the first stage of consciousness is the Kheper into the day cycle. And the Kheper is like the scarab beetle, and it was called, he said, the driller. And the driller has to do with how the scarab beetle would go to a dung heap, basically, and put his egg, or they believed that the scarab was androgynous, so they would put the egg into the dung ball and roll it up. And in a way, that to me symbolizes earth, right? But he doesn't earn his wings again until the day cycle. So Kheper was the first cycle. It's the sun at dawn. The second stage of consciousness was called Ra. And Hakim would always say, Ra is not just the sun god. He's not, you know, he said all of the netters represented different aspects of the sun. meaning the sun breathes out into all these individuated aspects. So in a way, you can interpret that as consciousness itself. But Ra was a stage of the sun, and it's the stage kind of in between, the dawn. It's like when the sun starts to rise before noon, it's called Ra, and it meant the stubborn. And you can relate that to a stubborn or impetuous young male, very gang ho, thinks he knows
Teenage
it all.
energy.
Exactly. But the next stage he called Un. And Un is, of course, my favorite stage. Un is where we get our word Nun. And it's the shadowless stage, right? The sun does not cast any shadows. So I call this shadowless consciousness. It's like full-time gnosis. But the other thing that happens at noon is the sun we have this perception of the sun not moving. It's a moment of silence. So again, that's the shadowless. He said this was called the wise one. The sun at its zenith or at its strongest, and this is consciousness at its height, but there's no movement. It's silent. There's
This
nothing.
is 0 point.
It's nun, it's gnosis. That is
Un.
the root of the word university. And also it was Heliopolis, where of course the first university was for the priesthood. But anyway, yeah, so yeah, and Un also is Nun, which is none, which is that sea of primordial waters, right? So again, a moment of silence. And here you have Horus with the double crown, the white crown of Upper Egypt and the red crown of Lower Egypt, and they are together. When you wear them together, this again represents that moment of oneness, but also the uniting of the two lands, also representing the two hemispheres of the brain. So you've brought the two, you've transmuted your polarity, and you've come back to centeredness, Un. So powerful, powerful symbol. Well, the next stage is Aten comes out of Un, right? Aten, the wiser, is the sun at its maturity, its middle to late afternoon. This is the highest state of consciousness when we are alive again, right? We've gone from the moment of silence. Now we've breathed out into life again, but we're at our highest stage of consciousness, and I liken this moment is happening from Leo into Cancer. And again, we're going to do a whole presentation on this and these stages and ages as related to our time references. But so we're coming out in the golden age, this highest state of consciousness. And then suddenly the next stage, we fall into Amun or Amen, right? And Amen or Amun is the sun becomes the hidden one. That's what Amun or Amen meant, the hidden one. As it is swallowed by Newton, vanishes. Amen hides in the darkness. And, and anybody, I remember Stephen Mailer, because, I went on several tours with him, and he always used to say, so which stage do you think we're in? And a lot of people want to believe we're in Aten, right? We're smarter than we ever were. But the truth is, we're probably at our lowest state of consciousness now, and we're fully rooted in the age of Amun right now, or Amen. We've called that the dream time, or we need to wake up, and this is what it's referring to. What were you going to say, Alan?
About the word Amen or Amen that we all know as the closing of a prayer.
Yes, and you can almost say, when you say that, there are two ways to look at it. You can say, I agree to keep it hidden, right? Or you can believe that you're saying, Amen, that you have faith that the sun will rise again. Again, two ways to look at it. But I like that you brought that up, Alan, because it also refers, the stage of Amun is the hidden stage. This is the stage when our truths are hidden or veiled from us. And we're going to talk about this later, but the veil that we're talking about is the veil of Isis and her sister Nebhet. And together they are the magnetic field that surrounds us. And this veil is the veil of forgetfulness that we are born into in the age of Amun, when this happens. And I put this in the age of Taurus. But again, we're going to talk about this as we move along. Like the arms of the Tet symbol, the Tet of Isis, the arms come down, and that's our moment of silence again. And yeah, we are going to see all this imagery, promise.
When the magnetic field drops and we experience 0 point.
Yep, we go back to 0 point.
It's amazing.
Which is, yes, it is. And it's all here, and it's all amazing, and it's irrefutable. You're used to hearing me say it can't be any other way, because once you get these patterns, you see these formulas, and you realize that it literally is giving us all the information about who we are, where we came from, and how it works. And it can't be any other way. Also, I wanted to point out in the image of Amun Ra, next to, on the very right-hand corner, the lower right-hand corner, you see the glyphs for Amun Ra, and it gives you the 4 elements, which is fascinating. So you see earth, air, water, and fire, right, as Ra within his name.
Oh, right. I never noticed that. That's incredible.
Isn't it great? Yeah, they
you have
didn't
the
miss
feather
anything.
as the I representing air. You have the
Right.
M as representing the earth. You have the
Wind
water, the
and
N,
the
E-I-N-N, and then Ra for fire. Wow.
Yep. And you just thought his name was Amun, right? It's, you know, the symbolism hidden. Someone just asked me, a friend just asked me to refer to a course or a study of hieroglyphics. And I told them I couldn't give them anything that I felt, you know, that there's so many, and you can start anywhere. But unfortunately, people tend to say that every hieroglyph means this or this means that. And they're forgetting that there's so much hidden within even a phrase, you know, in a name, that there's so much, again, so many
Layers
levels.
and layers and layers of meaning. It's unbelievable.
Exactly. And this again is what Hakim taught me. It's like you can't just look at something and walk away from it. You really have to go deeper. And as you pointed out, use your intuition to get you even further. I was just telling you before we started, I have these things come to me in the middle of the night. I wake up and I see all this stuff. And like, oh my gosh. But it's, you know, putting it out there and asking the right questions. So we talked about the 5 stages of consciousness, and I bring this in just to show you that this is emulated in several different ways. Those 5 stages of consciousness, again, representing the 5 stages, represented by the 5 stages of the sun, can be likened to the 5 calls to prayer of Islam. Or here we have the 5 different names of every king. They had 5 names, and each different name related to one of these stages of consciousness. So when people even ask me about the King's List, the Manitou's King's List, which we're going to talk about in a future presentation as well, you know, he went back to a time when the kings could live for hundreds of thousands of years, or, you know, tens of thousands, and then it gets, you know, shorter and shorter. The names and the labels also refer to cycles and cycles within cycles. You know, different names of the kings, like Khafre means the Ka of Ra, really important. We're going to talk about that. Snefru means double harmony. That has the key to understanding the purpose of why the pyramid was labeled after him, right? So you start to understand when you go deeper, you see more, and you can start to unravel keys to so many different aspects of mythology and the structures in Egypt. So here are these images of Amun, and I can remember people asking me all the time, what is that thing coming out of the back of his head, right? So Amun, again, relating to the stage of consciousness that we're in, he's the hidden one, and look, he's plugged in. That plug goes all the way to the ground. He is plugged in. Fascinating. We still use this phrase today. You know, we are earthbound, we're plugged in, and that becomes even a symbol for we're plugged into the system. So the age of Amun is when the system begins to hide our truths from us. Just, you know, and in a way, we're at this point in time, you know, this is that moment when, you know, civilization, you know, the dawning of civilization happens with the dawning of the age of Amun, because this is the time that we come together. We've lost our senses, all those greater senses, and we need each other. We have to work together. We come together in cities, and the system is born. And then there's Amenhotep, right? He comes at a time, 18th dynasty, Amenhotep IV, and he changes his name because he doesn't like that. Akhenaten changed his name from Amenhotep to Akhenaten to relate as an understanding of the cycles. He actually did go to the university in Heliopolis, and he learned all the secret and hidden truths, and he knew what was happening in that time. The priests of Amun were beginning to gain power. They were more powerful than the kings themselves. So Akhenaten takes his capital and he moves it to middle, central Egypt to get away from the power of the priests. I can call him the first religious rebel. And there's so much more. And again, we're going to do a whole presentation or series on Akhenaten. Fascinating time period. But I put this here to point out that, he's looking at these cycles. These cycles exist. And they were well understood in the ancient times. So, Akhenaten did not invent the concept of Aten. It's mentioned in the Old Kingdom texts, even back to the Third Dynasty, or it could be even further. He wanted to return to Aten. He knew what that meant. It was a time of great knowing, and he didn't want it to be hidden. So it wasn't about going back to the one God. And again, we're going to talk about this at great length. He understood that the netters were at all aspects of the one, and that's what he was referring to. And he's talking about the great central sun, that center itself that we all return to. And just a little more about his name. It's understood, people say his name, it's translated in many ways. They say it's the child of Aten, the spirit of Aten, the son of the sun. But according to Hakim, he said it was the shadow of the wiser, or the reflected light of the sun. So the wiser being that highest state of consciousness. So everyone that's heard this and hasn't heard this before might be aware of the Yuga cycles. And so I put this in there because, Hakim was asked once, that it was, was it exactly the same as the concept or the knowing about the Yuga cycles? And he smiled and, chuckled and said, but of course. And it was pointed out to him that, well, the Yuga cycles are 4 stages. And Hakim just again smiled and said, they just missed the one. And that's that moment of silence, right? It is the same, but they've missed the one. And of course, there's many schools of thought on the time periods of when these cycles happen. And I'm not going to get into that right now, but this is another quote by Manly P. Hall, who was he has so much deep esoteric knowing. But he says the 4 ages of the Greek mystics, the Golden Age, the Silver Age, the Bronze Age, and the Iron Age, are metaphoric expressions referring to the 4 major periods in the life of all things. This is a breath of life, and it happens in a day, in a year, and in a great year. In the divisions of the day, they signify dawn, midday, sunset, and midnight. In the duration of gods, men, universes, they denote the periods of birth, growth, maturity, and decay. And it can't be any other way.
This is something we all experience.
Exactly. In every breath. In every breath. That's what's amazing. We have so much power every time we take a breath. And you hear about these schools where they do breath work. Wow, this is important. To recognize the importance and the value of breath. I'm including this because these are actually based on real texts. Many texts allude to the idea that the world, after countless cycles of renewal, is destined to end. This end is described in a passage in the Coffin text and a more explicit one in the Book of the Dead, in which Atum says, He will one day dissolve the ordered world and return to his primeval inert state within the waters of chaos. Here is that moment of silence, folks. All things other than the creator will cease to exist, except Osiris, who will survive along with him. Yet with the creator God and the God of renewal together in the waters that gave rise to the orderly world, there is the potential for a new creation to arise in the same matter as the old. Cycles within cycles within cycles, over and over again. So I've included this in so many of my lectures because this is I found this online, and it speaks to the energy of the current, and this also speaks to the energy of the cycles. So before we go to the next slide, I'm going to ask, he has two like silver balls, and he's going to run them across these two paths, and one is a straight path up and back, and the other path is a sine wave, right? And I ask, which is faster? Which ball do you think will get back to the beginning faster?
I would think the one on the straight path.
Okay, well, here we go.
And I'm totally wrong.
Isn't that amazing? I call this serpent power. That's my name for it, by the way. But it's showing you the power. This is the breath of life, and it's a sine wave, right? It's a sin wave. Garden of Eden, I'll get to that in a moment. But what we're looking at is this power of the cycles, right? You know, there's the Sisyphus effect in going up the hill, right? So when I say watch for the pause, every time you get to the top or the bottom, there's a pause.
There's a tiny pause right before the energy shifts, and it goes, the inertia forces it the other way.
But it's the power of coming down the hill or the mountain, right? Mm-hmm. The power of that is so fast that it gives the ball momentum. And then it enables it to move faster than the other ball that has no currency. It's boring, right? So we can get more technical about all this, and I'm going to bring this up again in future. But just to show you how this emulates the cycles and the cycles of time, and how time can slow up, it can get faster, it can get slower, and it can pause. And that's what I'm talking about with the cycles. So many of us think we feel that time is speeding up, that we're not getting near as much done in the same time period as we did, maybe a couple years ago. And I know this. I know I can't get near as much done.
And there's a very good reason for that.
Exactly. It's all part of the cycle.
You're seeing a visual representation of it right there. Okay.
Yeah, exactly. That's why I love visuals. That's why I like to do presentations so people can see what I'm talking about. So that same breath, that same breath. Exactly, is portrayed in this simple symbol of the Tsimitawi, which is, it's said to be a symbol that's talking about uniting the two lands, but it's really the breath in and out. It's still speaking to the cycles, right? So in the center, you see the image of the man, and you can actually see the lungs and the windpipe, and the Tao is basically at the voice box, right? Because this is that moment of resonance when you rise higher, with that end of the breath at the top, the height, when it's actually almost like the inhale, in my opinion. And then the exhale takes you back out into separation consciousness. It's basically a great yogic breath that they speak about in India, in Hindu. This is huge, and again, a powerful exercise. And think about when you're breathing, feel that you breathe out. That's breathing out into separation. Breathe back in again. You're breathing back to your center, right? And every moment that you stop, when you bring that breath back in, that is a moment when you can totally recreate yourself, right? That is a 0 point moment in every breath that we take. But this symbol, in its most ancient form, had no figures, no icons. It was just the lotus and the papyrus representing the masculine and the feminine, right? These are the two lungs of this breath, right? And then, you have that breathing in and breathing out again. So yeah, and the symbolic depiction illustrates the windpipe or trachea from which the which form the axis from which the torus field develops from the lungs. See, it gets even bigger. So the papyrus and lotus plants represent the duality of breath of the bronchial tree within the respiratory system. It's the tree of life, right? This is crowned by the vocal cords or voice box from which sound, as the netter hue meaning sound, emanates, right? So as you breathe into resonance and unity consciousness, you raise your levels of awareness. And as you breathe out into separation consciousness, you fall back into form, held hostage in a belief that you are your body. And again, I talk about, we talk about that a lot, but this is a huge and powerful symbol, one of the most ancient symbols in Egypt. What are you going to say?
Just that I'm blown away and I don't know what to say.
Good enough. Yeah, we'll bring this up again. And here we have, I love these images, and again, I'm just bringing these in because they speak to these cycles. Ma'at was the netter of balance. She represented balance. And balance is always the ultimate goal, transmuting polarity and uniting the two lands, as we've already talked about. So here we see these great figures. One on the left is the Sippus of Horus, and it is a Ptolemaic symbol, but it comes from something far more ancient. And what we're looking at is there's this young Horus. He has the innocence of youth, but he's standing on these crocodiles, and the crocodile symbolized digestion, right? So digestion of fear, digestion of anger, right? Transmuting your polarity. And you see him he's holding lions and tigers and bears, right? Well, scorpions and lions and serpents, and he's standing on the crocodiles. He's not killing the beast, he's transmuting the beast. And the beasts are always within. You cannot kill the beast, right? So as he transmutes them, he's coming back into oneness, right? It's just beautiful. And on the image on the right, you have an image that's called Nehi, but he's Ophiuchus. He's that 13th zodiac sign. He's the serpent bearer. He's doing the same thing. That symbol comes from Kamambo, which also speaks to the cycles and cycles within cycles. And he's mastered the two dual opposing serpents, the two dual opposing waveforms, to bring us back into that moment of silence. The serpent bearer, the Ophiuchus is in the center point between Scorpio and Sagittarius, which is basically I call it the wormhole to the center of the galaxy. It's in a direct alignment with the center of our galaxy, right? And when we come to that moment in time, when we hit that place, that's when we move from literally we go back from being physical into being non-physical, from form into formless. But again, we're going to talk about this as we move further into further presentations. And I also want to point out that these serpent bearers are all over the world. Everywhere I've been, now I got this image online, but I've seen these images in different places all over the world, and it's all about this moment when we transmute our polarity and come back into that oneness, shadowless consciousness, if you will, are moving from one form to another. So again, here's that great yogic breath, and it's just a beautiful, beautiful symbol and practice. And here you can see it in another way, another level of understanding, because as you have this lotus and papyrus, that's plant life, right? And we know that our plants work in synchronicity with, organic life forms. So together, they're creating another cycle of life. On the right, you're looking at this symbol, where animals and plants breathe in oxygen, and plants create oxygen with photosynthesis to give it back. So you have this cycle of oxygen and carbon dioxide moving. And it's also represented by the Simatawi, keeping the balance of anything living and breathing, keeping it all in balance in nature. And also, I love to see this, this understanding of how the heart and the lungs work together to keep the body in balance with, oxygen, to feed oxygen back into the blood and then breathe out the carbon dioxide. So there's that.
And it's actually the breathing that controls the heart rate. The lungs act as a bellows, which helps the heart pump. So if you can master breathing, you'll master your heart rate. You'll be able to master your blood pressure. You'll be able to master your endocrine system and your hormone production. You'll be able to balance the two hemispheres of the brain, and then you'll experience exactly that moment of gnosis where you're holding the two serpents riding the mare, as we'll get into later on.
Exactly. And so we breathe out the carbon dioxide that feeds the photosynthesis that then provides the oxygen for the breath to continue. So again, it's just absolutely beautiful and incredible that one symbol can speak to so many different things. And
it's interesting in this period where carbon has been so demonized, the base, the foundational building block of life, the element carbon, has been rebranded as a toxin that needs to be regulated and done away with. Unbelievable.
Well, and again, absolutely. But again, here you're looking at it on an even bigger scale of, here's our planet's forests. And here, they say that there are our forests are our lungs, right? Inhaling the atmospheric carbon dioxide and expelling the oxygen. But what's happening to those forests today? What are we doing? And it's so important to keep this in balance. And this is why, again, we keep pointing out that the ancients were so deeply connected to nature, and they used implosive technologies because they wouldn't damage nature. They would never destroy their forests the way we destroyed our forests, because once you lose the breath, right? What happens? That breath is life.
Right. Destroying the planet is ultimately destroying ourselves.
Exactly.
There's no escape from that.
It's the breath. And, you could argue that we go back to that moment of silence. Two ways to look at that. But I think, we're here for a reason. And we're here, I think, to cherish every moment and experience this and learn and grow and raise our levels of awareness for when that moment of silence occurs. We know how to walk through it with grace and move on to something even more special.
Exactly.
So this is a good place to end this session, and we'll continue on when we go further. And just want to remind everybody that I do several tours every year. And oh, by the way, we were showing you the images of our time in Abu Simbel. And I'm working right now with the Grand Return. It's a new big web portal. And we're going to host a tour together in February. And we are going to go to Abu Simbel to witness solar alignment. So anyone wants to experience that, keep in touch with me either through my website, horusrising.com, where, we'll be posting it soon with all the details. It's going to be a really unique and special event. So just wanted to point that out.
So thanks, Patricia. Thanks, everybody watching. Please like, share, and subscribe, and tune in for more. We'll be back very soon. Thanks.